In the beginning, there was the Varek. Before the first human city rose from river mud, before the first wheel turned in the first hand, before fire was anything more than a thing that came from the sky and consumed what it found, the Varek were already old. Not old the way mountains are old, which is simply the accumulation of time without the accumulation of consequence. Old the way certain ideas are old, the ones that have been tested against every form of contradiction and have not broken, the ones that have outlasted every civilization that tried to replace them. The Varek had been in the galaxy when the galaxy itself was young enough to still be deciding what it wanted to be. They had watched the stars form. They had watched the first chemical reactions in the first warm oceans of the first worlds that would eventually produce something that could look back at the stars and wonder about them. They had watched, and they had waited, and they had grown into something that the galaxy had not seen before and has not seen since. A civilization so old that it had moved past every question of survival and power and resource, and had arrived at something on the other side of all of those things. Something quieter. Something that had no good name in any language younger than 100,000 years. The other species feared them. This is important to understand because the fear was not ignorant fear, the fear of something unknown. It was the opposite. It was the fear of something known too well. The Skethra, who were the oldest spacefaring species in this arm of the galaxy after the Varek themselves, had a saying that translated approximately as, "The Varek are the answer to a question you do not want to ask." The Kethvora, the great administrators of the middle sectors, maintained a standing protocol that required any ship approaching within 3 light-years of Varek-designated space to transmit its intention, its cargo manifest, and its entire historical record before proceeding. Not because the Varek had asked for this. Because the Kethvora had decided, after 200 years of careful observation, that anything less felt presumptuous. The Lethsanhari, who were known across 4 galactic arms as the species least given to unnecessary caution, had a phrase in their primary diplomatic language that translated as, "Even we do not go there." The there in question was not a place. It was a posture. It was the posture of approaching the Varek as an equal. Even the Lethsanhari, who had once sent a single ship into the territory of a civilization with a fleet 5,000 times the size of theirs purely to deliver a message they felt needed delivering in person, did not adopt that posture with the Varek. The galaxy had understood, through long experience and occasional painful lessons, that the Varek existed on a different level, not a hostile level, not a threatening level in the conventional sense, simply a different one. The kind of different that produces, in every species that encounters it, the specific and unmistakable response of taking a step back. The humans did not take a step back. This requires some explanation, because it was not, as it might appear from the outside, an act of bravado or ignorance, or the particular kind of courage that is actually just insufficient information about the danger involved. The humans knew about the Varek. They had been in the galactic community for 200 years by the time the question of the Varek became relevant to them, and in 200 years they had learned a great deal about the shape of things out here. They had learned about the Kethvora and their 3-light-year protocol. They had learned about the Lethsanhari and the phrase that even they did not use with the Varek. They had learned, through the kind of patient and thorough research that humanity had been conducting since before it was old enough to conduct it very well, everything that was available to learn about the oldest civilization in the galaxy. They had done all of this learning and they had processed it, and they had arrived, as a species, at a conclusion about the Varek that every other species had also arrived at. The conclusion was, the Varek are something entirely different from everything else out here. Every other species stopped at that conclusion and treated it as a reason to maintain distance. Humanity treated it as a reason to be interested. The moment that history would later mark as the beginning of everything was a small one. It did not feel like a beginning at the time. Most beginnings do not. It was a standard deep space survey mission, the kind that humanity had been running for 150 years, sending small crews and mid-range vessels to systems that had not been visited before or had not been visited recently. The crew of the survey ship Persistent Question, a name that had been chosen by the crew through a vote that the mission logs suggest was considerably more contentious than a name vote has any right to be, was 3 people: a pilot named Reyes, a systems specialist named Park, and a xenologist named Dr. Amara Cole, who had spent 20 years studying every documented account of Varek interaction available in the combined Galactic archive, and who had, in the opinion of her colleagues, developed an interest in the Varek that was several degrees past professional. She would have described it differently. She would have described it as appropriate. She would have argued that the appropriate response to encountering the most ancient and complex civilization in the known galaxy was to want to understand it as completely as possible, and that any response less than this was not caution, but a failure of imagination. Her colleagues generally found this argument convincing in the abstract and slightly alarming in practice. The Persistent Question was not supposed to go near Varek space. The survey route had been filed with the Council of Navigation, and it did not include any systems within the designated 3-light-year threshold that most human navigators maintained out of a combination of official protocol and general common sense. What happened was this. Park ran a systems diagnostic in hour 47 of the mission and found an anomaly in the drive calibration that required a course correction, and the course correction that was most efficient from a fuel and time standpoint took them slightly closer to the edge of the threshold than the original route. Slightly, in this case, meant approximately 2.5 light-years from the nearest designated Varek system, still outside the threshold maintained by the Kethvora. Inside the threshold maintained by every other species in this part of the galaxy, who treated the Kethvora's 3 light-years as a floor rather than a ceiling. Reyes noted the proximity in the ship's log with the particular brevity that experienced pilots use when they are aware that something is significant but prefer not to make a production of it. Park noted it in the system's log and said nothing. Dr. Amara Cole noted it in her personal research log and said, out loud to no one in particular, that this was interesting. She was looking at her instruments when the signal came through. Not specifically at anything that would have predicted a signal. She was reviewing archived data about previous surveys in this general region, the kind of background research she did constantly, and which her crewmates had learned to recognize as her version of reading before sleep. The signal came through on a frequency that the ship systems flagged as unusual, because it matched no known communication format in the database, which was a database that covered 200 years of humanity's experience in the galactic community, and was therefore fairly comprehensive. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was, in fact, extremely quiet, the kind of signal that a less attentive system might have filtered as background radiation. The Persistent Question systems were not less attentive. They flagged it, and the flag woke up the night cycle monitoring protocol, and the monitoring protocol routed it to the most relevant specialist on board, which was Dr. Amara Cole, who was already awake and already looking at her instruments, and who saw the flag and felt something that she would later, under considerable pressure to describe it precisely, call the specific sensation of knowing that something has just changed without yet knowing what. She woke Reyes first. This was procedure. Reyes was the pilot, and any significant contact situation required the pilot to be informed before any response was initiated. Reyes came to the bridge in the state of readiness that experienced deep space pilots achieve, which is to say immediately and completely alert despite having been asleep 4 minutes earlier, which is a skill that takes years to develop, and that no one who has it can fully explain to anyone who does not. Reyes looked at the signal data, then looked at the proximity reading, then looked at Dr. Cole with an expression that pilots in significant situations develop over years of significant situations, an expression that conveys the full complexity of the moment in approximately 2/3 of a second. Dr. Cole said, "I know." Reyes said, "We are going to wake Park." She said, "Yes." He said, and then she looked at the signal for a moment. She had spent 20 years studying every documented account of Varek interaction available in the combined Galactic archive. She had read about the Keth-Vora 3-light-year protocol. She had read about the Leth-Sanhari and the posture that even they did not adopt. She had read about every species that had ever stepped back, and she had spent 20 years wondering what would have happened if one of them had not. She said, "And then I think we should answer it." Park, when woken and briefed, said several things that the official Missy on log records as technical assessment, but that the personal log more accurately describes as a fairly comprehensive inventory of concerns delivered in the rapid-fire manner of someone who has just been told they are closer to Varek space than is generally considered advisable and is processing this information in real time. When the inventory was complete, Park looked at Dr. Cole and said, "You have wanted to do this your entire career." And she said, "I have wanted to understand them my entire career." He said, "Is there a difference?" She said, "Yes. Understanding requires contact." He said, "And you think answering a signal that may or may not be from the oldest civilization in the galaxy at 2.5 light years from their designated space is the right way to initiate contact?" She said, "I think it might be the only way that has not been tried." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Every species that has interacted with the Varek has done so on Varek terms in Varek-designated contexts according to frameworks that the Varek defined. No one has ever just answered when they talked first." He thought about this. He said, "Because no one else has been in a position to," she said, "or because no one else thought it was worth the risk." He said, "And you think it is?" She looked at the signal again. She said, "I think not finding out is a larger risk than finding out." And Park, who had known her for 4 years and understood that this was the thing she had been moving toward for 20, said, "All right, let us answer it." The response they sent was not elaborate. Dr. Cole had thought about this moment for 20 years, and the message she sent was 11 words. "We received your signal. We are listening. We are here." She had prepared over those 20 years dozens of more complex messages. Messages that established humanity's credentials, that summarized human history, that demonstrated intellectual capability, that offered various frameworks for establishing mutual understanding. She discarded all of them. She sent 11 words because she had come to believe, in 20 years of studying the oldest civilization in the galaxy, that the Varek already knew everything that could be said in a more complex message. What they did not know, what no species had thought to communicate to them in a way that was simple enough to be unambiguous, was this: "We are not afraid. We are paying attention. We are here and we are willing to stay." 11 words. She sent them, and then the 3 of them sat in the bridge of the persistent question at 2.5 light years from the edge of Varek space and waited. The response came in 47 minutes. 47 minutes was, by any calculation, an extraordinarily fast response from a civilization that operated on the timescale of geological epochs. It suggested, though none of them said this out loud in the moment, that the signal they had received had not been accidental, that they had been noticed before they noticed anything. That the Varek had been watching and had, in their own time and by their own criteria, decided that this particular crew of this particular ship at this particular moment was worth a response. The response, when the translation systems had worked through it, was 9 words. "We have been waiting for someone to say that." 9 words. Reyes read them 3 times. Park read them twice. Dr. Amara Cole read them once and then sat back in her chair and did not say anything for a long time, because she had spent 20 years preparing for this conversation, and now that it was beginning, she found she needed a moment to understand what it meant that it was beginning, what it meant that the oldest civilization in the galaxy had been waiting, and that no one in all the thousands of years of all the species that had encountered them had said what 3 humans in a mid-range survey ship had just said, that they were listening, that they were there, that they were not afraid. The conversation that followed lasted 11 days. The persistent question remained at its position, running careful fuel calculations to ensure they could hold for the duration, while Dr. Cole conducted what would become the most extensively documented first contact in human history, and what the Verk, in their subsequent communications, would refer to simply as the beginning of the conversation, as though every prior interaction with every prior species had been something else. Something that had not qualified as conversation in whatever sense the Verk used the word. Rays flew the ship and kept the systems running and brought coffee at intervals that Dr. Cole later said she did not remember receiving, but which the mission logs confirm were delivered with notable regularity. Park monitored every frequency and recorded everything, and maintained the security protocols that required them to log their position with the Navigation Council every 6 hours, which meant that the Navigation Council was aware so. Mething was happening at 2.5 light-years from Verk space long before the mission returned, and that the Council had 11 days to try to figure out what to do about it, which, as it turned out, was approximately 11 days less than they needed. What the Verk said in those 11 days is documented in full in the contact archives, and has been studied by every xenologist and historian and diplomat in the human sphere, and many outside it. What Dr. Cole said is documented equally fully. The summary that appears in every history of the period is accurate as far as it goes, but necessarily leaves out the texture of the thing, the quality of those 11 days that the transcripts convey imperfectly, and that Dr. Cole's personal journals convey better. The Verk were not what she had expected. This sounds like a simple thing to say, and it is, but it is also the most significant thing. She had expected, in some part of herself that she had not fully examined despite 20 years of study, something enormous, something that would produce in her the same response it had produced in every other species. The step back, the protocol, the maintained distance. What she found instead was something that did not immediately map onto any of her existing frameworks, and that she spent much of the first day of the conversation trying to name. By the end of the first day, she had settled on a word that she would use in her reports, and that would be quoted in every subsequent account of the contact. Present. The Verk were present in the conversation in a way that she had not anticipated. Not administratively present, not diplomatically present, not present in the careful and managed way of a civilization conducting official business. Present the way someone is present when they are genuinely interested in what the person across from them is saying. They asked about humanity, not in the way that a survey instrument asks about a species, cataloging capabilities and threat assessments and resource values. They asked about humanity, the way a person asks about another person when they have been watching them for a long time from a distance and have finally been given the opportunity to ask the questions they have been accumulating. They asked about the wars and how humanity had managed to survive them. They asked about the rebuilding, the specific human pattern of rebuilding that every long-range observer of the species had eventually noted, and that most had filed under anomaly and moved on from. They asked about grief and about laughter, and about the relationship between those two things in human experience, which was a question that took Dr. Cole most of the third day to answer adequately. They asked about the stories. The human habit of narrative, the compulsive and universal drive to take experience and shape it into something with a beginning and a middle and an end, to impose structure on the chaos of events, and in doing so to make those events transmissible and preservable and meaningful, in ways they would not be otherwise. The Verk found the stories particularly interesting. They said, and this was the line that every journalist and historian and commentator would quote when the contact was made public, the line that appeared on the front of every news transmission in every human installation across 47 worlds. They said, "We have watched many species. Most of them describe what happens. You describe what it means. We had not understood that these were different things until we found someone who could explain the difference." Dr. Cole asked about them. She had been thinking about these questions for 20 years, and she asked them carefully, and in an order that had taken considerable thought. She asked why they had withdrawn from the galactic community in the way that every species had experienced as withdrawal, even though the Verk had never announced any such thing. She asked what they had learned in their long watching that they had not expected to learn. She asked about the specific fear that every species felt in relation to the Verk, and whether the Verk were aware of it and what they made of it. The answer to this last question came slowly and was the most carefully constructed response in the entire 11 days, as though the Verk had not spoken about this before and were choosing their words with the particular care of something being said for the first time. They said, "We are aware of the fear. We have always been aware of it. We did not seek it. We do not require it. We have, for a very long time, found it in some ways the most isolating feature of our existence, that the thing which causes every species to treat us with the distance of reverence rather than the proximity of understanding is not anything we have done, but simply the fact of how long we have been here. Age, in this galaxy, produces a kind of loneliness that does not have a word in most languages. It produces the lonel iness of the thing that is too large to be approached, not because it is dangerous but because it is different, and difference of sufficient magnitude produces the step back, the protocol, the maintained distance. We have been the thing that caused the step back for a very long time. And then your ship appeared at 2.5 light years and sent 11 words and did not step back. The moment that Dr. Amara Cole later described as the one that changed everything for her personally was not the initial contact, and was not the 9-word response, and was not any of the large, historically significant moments of the 11 days. It was a small moment in the 8th day, during an exchange about the nature of time and how different species experienced it, when the Verk said something that the translation systems rendered with the note that direct translation was imprecise, and that the closest available equivalent in human language was an approximation rather than an exact rendering. The note was accurate. The approximation was this: we have been out here long enough to have forgotten what it felt like to not know something. To be surprised. To encounter something that the accumulated understanding of ages had not prepared us for. We had come to believe this state was simply the result of sufficient time and sufficient learning, that eventually every species either achieved it or ceased to exist. We had not considered the possibility that some species might maintain, by some mechanism we did not understand, the capacity to be genuinely surprised regardless of how much they know. We think you might be that species. We are trying to understand the mechanism. And Dr. Cole, who had spent 20 years studying the oldest civilization in the galaxy, and who had answered an unexpected signal with 11 words, and who was sitting in a mid-range survey ship on the 8th day of a conversation that no one had expected, and that was changing things in ways that could not yet be fully measured, said, "I think the mechanism is that we never decided we had learned enough. We never arrived at the answer and stopped asking the question. We just kept asking it, even when we knew a lot of the answer already, even when knowing a lot of the answer would have justified a certain amount of confidence. We kept asking anyway, because the asking is the thing, not the answer. The answer is just what tells you what the next question is." The persistent question returned to human space on the 14th day with 11 days of contact recordings, and a diplomatic pouch that Dr. Cole had spent the final 3 days of the mission preparing with the kind of precision that 20 years of anticipating this moment produces. The Council was not ready for them. This was not a failure of the Council, which had been doing its best with 11 days of advance notice of something that had no precedent in human history. It was simply the nature of the thing. Some things cannot be prepared for, regardless of notice. The return of the first humans to have a genuine conversation with the oldest civilization in the galaxy was one of them. Rays set the ship down at Callaway Station, and they walked through the docking corridor, and there were people there and lights, and the specific quality of attention that significant moments produce in crowds, that focused stillness that says, "Something has happened here that we do not yet fully understand, and we are waiting to understand it." Dr. Cole walked through all of it with the recordings and the diplomatic pouch, and the 11 days still alive in her in a way that she would later say did not fully become real to her until she was sitting in the debrief with the Council and someone asked, "What are they like?" And she thought about the 9-word response. the presence in the conversation, the loneliness of the thing that was too large to be approached, the line about species that maintained the capacity to be surprised. And she said, "They are very old and they have been very alone and they have been waiting for a very long time for someone to show up and just talk to them like they were a person." And the room was quiet for a moment. And then someone said, "And we did that." And she said, "We did." And someone else said, "Because we were not afraid." And she looked at the recordings in her hands. She said, "We were afraid. We were absolutely afraid. We just went anyway." And that, it turned out, was the whole difference. The lesson that history drew from the encounter with the Verk was not the lesson about diplomatic strategy, though there were many lessons about diplomatic strategy that followed. It was not the lesson about the galactic community and humanity's place in it, though those lessons followed too, in long and complicated and ongoing ways that are still unfolding. The lesson that mattered, the one that Dr. Amara Cole put in the last paragraph of her official contact report, and that has been quoted more than any other line in the 200 years since, was this: every civilization in the galaxy feared the Verk because the Verk were old and vast and different, and the appropriate response to something old and vast and different is to be careful and to maintain distance, and to proceed with the kind of caution that preserves your options and minimizes your risk. This is correct. This is wise. Humanity did not do this. Humanity received an unexpected signal at 2.5 light-years from the edge of Verk space and responded with 11 words that amounted to, "We are here and we are listening and we are not going anywhere." This was not careful. This was not the maintenance of distance or the preservation of options. It was the thing that humanity does when it encounters something it does not understand and that every prior experience has told it should produce caution. It goes toward it. It has always gone toward it. It cannot seem to help going toward it. And in this instance, as in more instances than the records fully show, going toward it was the thing that made all the difference. Not because caution was wrong. Caution was entirely correct, but because the Verk had been waiting for something that was not cautious, had been waiting in the loneliness of their ancient and unapproachable existence for something that would come toward them rather than away. And humanity arrived, as it tends to, as it will keep doing, because the question is always more interesting than the risk, and because the answer, whatever it turns out to be, is always worth asking for. The Galactic Archive contains, in its restricted section, a document that was not made public for 50 years after its creation. It is a record of a conversation between the Kethvora Council of Elders and a Verk representative that took place approximately 300 years before the persistent question arrived at 2.5 light-years from Verk space. The conversation is notable for many reasons, but the reason it was restricted for 50 years was a single exchange near its end. The Kethvora elder asked the Verk representative whether the Verk found the current arrangement satisfactory, whether the posture of respect that every species maintained, the 3 light-year protocols and the careful avoidance and the reverential distance, was something the Verk wanted or merely something they had accepted. The Verk representative was silent for a long time. Then it said, "We have never been asked this before." The elder said, "I know. I am asking now." Another long silence. Then the Verk representative said, "What we want and what we have accepted are not the same thing." The elder asked, "What do you want?" The Verk said, "We want someone to be interested in us the way we have been interested in everything else. We have spent 100,000 years watching the galaxy. We have never been watched back, not with genuine curiosity, genuine interest, genuine willingness to approach." The elder said nothing for a long time. Then said, "I do not know if any species will ever be able to do that." The Verk said, "Neither do we, but we are still waiting." This exchange was restricted for 50 years because the Kethvora Council did not know what to do with the information. It was declassified the year after the persistent question returned because, for the first time, the information had somewhere to go. Dr. Cole did not know about the restricted document when she sent her 11 words. She knew about the fear and the protocols and the maintained distance and the careful avoidance that every species, including her own, had practiced. What she did not know, because it was restricted, was that the thing she was approaching had been waiting to be approached, that the loneliness she would discover in the 8th day of conversation had been named, quietly, 300 years earlier, that the Verk had been carrying the knowledge that the stepping back was chosen rather than required, that any species could have come toward them if it had wanted to, and that none of them had wanted to, or had been capable of wanting to, or had been the kind of species for whom going toward the enormous and the ancient and the different was a natural response rather than an instinct to suppress. She found all of this out later. When she did, she said, "I am glad I did not know. I am glad I did not have that information when I sent the 11 words, because if I had known they were waiting, I might have thought about it more carefully. I might have considered the implications. I might have constructed a more appropriate first message. And I am not sure a more appropriate first message would have been the right one. Sometimes the right thing is the thing you say before you have thought too carefully about what the right thing is." The question that historians and xenologists and philosophers have been asking for 200 years, and will probably ask for 200 more, is why human it? Why was it humans who sent the 11 words? Why was it humans who answered the signal instead of stepping back the way every other species had stepped back for 100,000 years? The answers that have been proposed are numerous, and none of them entirely satisfactory, which is probably appropriate given the nature of the question. Some argue that it was specific circumstance, the course correction, the particular position, the specific crew. Others argue that it was something deeper, something structural about humanity that made this outcome more likely than it would have been for any other species. They point to the history, to the 6,000 years of going toward things that should have produced retreat, to the pattern of choosing the question over the comfortable silence, to the specific and stubborn human habit of treating enormous and incomprehensible things not as reasons to maintain distance, but as reasons to be more curious. They argue that if it had not been that crew on that mission on that day, it would eventually have been another crew on another mission on another day, because that is what humans do. They go toward things. It is what they have always done. It is what they will keep doing. The persistent question was not an accident. It was an inevitability wearing the clothes of a coincidence. Reyes, who had brought the coffee at regular intervals and had flown the ship with the steady competence of someone who understood that the best contribution in the middle of something historic was to keep the thing running, said the best thing about all of it in the debriefing, when someone asked what the experience had been like from a pilot's perspective. He said, "It was 11 days of sitting in a ship at 2.5 light years from the oldest civilization in the galaxy while my colleague talked to them. In terms of the flying, it was a standard extended hold. In terms of everything else, it was the most significant 11 days of my life." Someone asked, "Were you afraid?" He said, "Yes, the whole time, every day, every hour. I kept running the numbers on what we were doing, and the numbers kept coming out the same way, which was that we were doing something that no species had done and that there were very good reasons no species had done it." And someone asked, "But you stayed?" He said, "Of course I stayed. I was flying the ship, but also," he paused for a moment, "also because I wanted to know how it came out. I was afraid and I also wanted to know how it came out. And those two things were both true at the same time. And staying was the only way to find out, so I stayed. And I brought the coffee, and I found out, and it was worth it. Every day of it was worth it." There is a phrase in the Verk language that the translation systems have never found a fully adequate equivalent for. It has been translated variously as ancient witness, deep attention, and the watching that changes the watcher. The Verk used this phrase for the first time in their third communication to humanity, to describe what they had been doing for the 100,000 years before the persistent question arrived. The watching. The long watching of the galaxy that had produced, in beings who had seen everything and known everything, a specific kind of need that they had not known they had until someone arrived at 2.5 light years and sent 11 words into the dark. The need to be seen back. The Verk had been the ancient witness of the galaxy for 100,000 years. What they had not had was someone to witness them. Dr. Cole noted in her research logs, in the margin of the page where she had transcribed this phrase, in handwriting that had gotten smaller with age but never less precise. This is what the step back costs. The distance is safe, but the distance is also empty. Every species that maintained the distance lost the thing the distance was protecting them from, which is also the thing that would have changed them. We did not maintain the distance. We went in. And we found the thing the distance was protecting everyone from. And it was not dangerous. It was lonely. And we could do something about lonely. That is one of the things we are good at. The Varek have sent 12 further communications to humanity in the years since the persistent question, not to the galactic community at large. To humanity specifically, through the contact archive maintained by xenologists who have all read Dr. Cole's report and understood what it meant. One communication was a question: why do your stories always end? Your music continues. Your visual art accumulates. Your science and philosophy build without terminus, but your stories have endings. Why? Dr. Cole, still alive and still consulting the archive when this arrived, wrote the response herself. She said, "Because an ending is what makes the middle matter. If the story goes on forever, the choices inside it have no weight. The ending is what gives the rest of it." Meaning, there was a very long pause. Then the Varek said, "We had not considered that an ending could be a feature rather than a limitation. We will think about this." And Dr. Cole wrote, "Take your time." And the Varek wrote, "That is something we have an abundance of." And she wrote, "So do we in the ways that count." That was the last thing she ever sent to them. She died the following year. The contact archive recorded it in the log with the note. The conversation continues. Park, reviewing the mission data in the months after their return, found something in the recordings that had not been flagged by the automated analysis systems, and that he sat with for several weeks before he mentioned it to anyone. In the 47 minutes between the transmission of Dr. Cole's 11 words and the arrival of the Varek's 9-word response, there was a signal in the background frequencies that the ship systems had logged as interference and filed without further processing. Park, who had 30 years of experience reading signal data, did not think it was interference. He thought it was communication, internal communication within the Varek system, in frequencies and formats that the ship's translation systems were not equipped to parse. He ran every analysis available to him and could not determine the content of the communication. What he could determine, from the signal patterns and the intensity and the duration, was its character. The 47 minutes of internal Varek communication that preceded their 9-word response had the signature, as nearly as his instruments could measure, of something that he had seen before in human communication and that he knew how to recognize. It had the signature of a very long conversation, of many voices, of something being discussed from many angles by many participants before a response was sent. He did not know what they were discussing. He knew they were discussing it carefully. He knew they were discussing it together. He knew that whatever the 9 words said, they had been chosen with the full weight of whatever that 47-minute conversation had contained. He included this finding in his technical report and noted that he thought it was significant. He said, "They did not answer immediately. They thought about it first, together. And what I think that means is that the answer mattered to them. And what I think that means is that we mattered to them, already, in 47 minutes. Before they knew anything about us except that we had answered. That was enough. That was the whole thing. We showed up and we answered, and that was enough for them to spend 47 minutes deciding how to respond. I have been thinking about that for months. I think it means that showing up is most of it. I think it means that the most important thing we did was just be there. Everything else followed from that." 200 years on, the relationship between humanity and the Varek is the thing that every diplomat and xenologist and historian points to when they want to explain something about what humanity is and what it does. Not the military engagements, of which there have been several, or the economic expansions, or the technological developments, or any of the more visible and dramatic features of 2 centuries of spacefaring civilization. The relationship with the Varek. The one that started with an unexpected signal and a course correction and 11 words and a 47-minute wait and 9 words that said everything. The one that continues now, through the contact archive and the communications and the ongoing conversation that Dr. Cole started, and that has outlasted her, and that will outlast everyone currently alive. Historians note that it is, in the full sweep of galactic history, the first relationship of genuine mutual interest between a young species and the oldest civilization in the galaxy. Not deference, not administration, not the careful management of a power differential. Actual interest, actual curiosity going in both directions. The Varek curious about humanity and humanity curious about the Varek, and both of them finding, in the conversation, things they had not expected to find, and things they had not known they were looking for. The historians note this. What they note less often, because it is harder to document, is what produced it. What produced it was not strategy or calculation or diplomatic skill, though all of those things have contributed to what it has become. What produced it was 3 people in a mid-range survey ship at 2.5 light-years from the oldest civilization in the galaxy, one of whom had spent 20 years wanting this and sent 11 words, and one of whom had flown the ship and brought the coffee, and one of whom had read the signal data and noticed what the 47-minute conversation meant. 3 people, 11 words, everything that followed from those. There is a wall in the Contact Archive building at New Gen. Eva where the full text of Dr. Cole's 11 words is displayed, not the 9-word response, though that is displayed too on the opposite wall. The 11 words, "We received your signal, we are listening, we are here." Visitors to the archive, and there are many, from every world in the human sphere and increasingly from other species as well, stand in front of those 11 words and read them, and some of them cry, and some of them just stand there for a long time in the particular stillness of people looking at something that means more than they know how to articulate. The guides at the archive are trained to let them stand, not to explain or contextualize or add information, just to let them stand there and feel whatever the words produce in them, because the words produce different things in different people, and all of those things are appropriate, and none of them require explanation. What they produce in most people, eventually, after the initial impact, is something that settles into a specific feeling that the guides, in their internal training materials, describe simply as recognition, the feeling that something you already knew has been confirmed, the feeling that a thing you suspected about your species, about what you are capable of, about the kind of animal you are and what you do when you are at your best, has been written on a wall in 11 words and is now beyond dispute. We received your signal. We are listening. We are here. 3 sentences. The first says, "We noticed you." The second says, "We are paying attention." The third says, "We are not going anywhere." Together they say, "You exist and we know it, and we are choosing, with full awareness of everything that choice entails, to be in this with you." That is, in 11 words, the entire history of how humanity has survived and expanded and connected and continued. It is the thing we do. It is the thing we have always done. It is the thing we will keep doing in this system and the next and the one after that, for as long as there are signals to receive, and as long as we are the kind of species that answers them. Drop 1 word in the comments. Whatever the moment was in this story that landed, just 1 word. I read every single one. The next story on this channel is nothing like this one. Different voice, different angle, different everything. That is the promise of this channel. Subscribe to UG Human HFY. The next episode is already being written.